This is the brand new Garmin Instinct 3. And after using it for a while now, including a 60-kilometer, 12-hour trek into the mountains, I've got a lot of thoughts about it. And more importantly, details on where it works really well, like the absolutely mind-boggling battery, and where it frankly sucks, because there's definitely some suckage. Both my wife and myself have been putting it through all sorts of sport types over the past little while. From swimming, to cycling, to running, to trekking, to trail running, to you name it, we've been doing even stand-up paddleboarding. Because look, it's a sport mode on this watch, and someone had to try it. So I'm going to start off by covering what's new in the models, then we'll go into some of the basics, then we'll dive into the sport features, then the navigation features, a whole big deep dive on the solar bits, because arguably that's probably one of the key reasons you would buy this watch in terms of the battery life and some of the features there. And then we'll get into accuracy and bugs. Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about bugs, because this has not been smooth sailing. And then finally I'll wrap things up. It's as simple as that. So the very first thing to know about this watch is there are two core models here. There is a Solar Edition and there is an AMOLED Edition. The Solar Edition is a MIP-based display. It's a black and white based display versus the AMOLED Edition that has a full kind of color brilliant display. And the key thing to understand about the Garmin Instinct that drives why there's now two different display options is because there's always largely been two different core groups of Garmin Instinct buyers. The first group of buyers are those that want that ruggedized kind of styling of the watch. They want all the Garmin smartwatch features, but they want this ruggedized look to it. The second group of people, though, are those that want the crazy long battery life, primarily in GPS modes, but even just day-to-day modes of the Garmin Instinct series on the solar side in particular. The challenge has been, though, that first group of people, they want an AMOLED display. They want that ruggedized look, but they want all the benefits of a nice, brilliant display. So Garmin is now giving you that. They're giving you the ability to choose which display type you want, and with that, you have some battery trade-offs that you can see on the screen right there. That said, the battery trade-offs are not that bad in the grand scheme of things, especially for the AMOLED people. Like, these are still astoundingly good battery life numbers, and I'll talk about battery in just a little bit. But the cool part here is that the betterment of the display is not limited to just the AMOLED edition. In fact, the Solar Edition saw a huge increase in the clarity of the display. You can see side by side here between the Garmin Instinct 2, the 2X, and the 3. The 3 display is way more clear. You'll also notice on the Solar Edition that reddish tinge is gone. So now they're using the same kind of solar technology found in the Fenix 8, but just a whole lot more of it here on this watch. But in turn, you get rid of that reddish tinge around the outside. It's just a kind of pure, clean black look. And speaking of black, by the way, on the Solar Editions, there's orange tinges on all of them. Orange is effectively the new black here. There's really no escaping it on the Solar Editions. The AMOLED Editions do have versions without orange, but not the Solar Editions, unfortunately. Also, when it comes to escaping, don't escape out of this video. If you could just watch it all the way through, that is the only thing the YouTube gods care about these days. Just watch it to the end. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, speaking of new features, all of the new Instinct 3s have the flashlight built in. You just simply double tap this top button like this, and then it turns on. You can see it right there. There's 4 different levels of brightness on the white side, plus a red one that can turn on as well. There we go. I like the red one at night. It's just not as harsh as the white light, but to each their own. The Garmin flashlight is one of those things that people like to make fun of until they have it, think it's all Spectre gadgety. And then once you have it, you're like, this is the most practical thing on earth. After all, we have flashlights in our phone. This is way more practical at night to have on your wrist, in a tent, even just getting around your house, a hotel that you don't know, etc. It is one of my favorite features hardware-wise on a Garmin watch. Next, all of the editions now have multi-band or dual-frequency GPS. And this gives you super accurate GPS, but it also gives you Garmin's SatIQ. SatIQ basically allows them to go ahead and do multi-band or dual-frequency GPS and burn more battery when they need it in the mountains, next to cliffs and things like that. But then to tune that way down and draw that power down when they don't need it. And it's doing this constantly second by second. But check out my accuracy test later on the video, because I did test not only with multi-band and dual frequency, but all the way at the other end of the spectrum with GPS only to see how well that fared. And the results will absolutely surprise you in a good way. It is pretty impressive. In any case, the next item is all the watches have Garmin Pay on them now, which allows you to do contactless payments, assuming your bank is supported in your country. There's a list of roughly, I think, 1,600 banks on that list right now around the world. You can go to Garmin's site and find the list there. It's just like it's always been. It's just now on all their watches. And then finally, on the newness front, there's a bunch of new software features. I'm just going to list right there. Most of these are fairly minutiae, and I'll maybe talk about them throughout the rest of the video. You can see them all right there. But there are 2 that are notable on this list I want to mention. The first one is the addition of Garmin Share. This is something that allows you basically to share courses and stuff between two watches if you're outside of cellular range. Just like the two watches in the middle of the woods, you can share things back and forth. Super useful, not only in the middle of the woods, but when Garmin's IT system is down like it was a few weeks ago. It's actually how I shared my routes between my watches when I wanted to go off and start this trail run. The second one is the large font mode. On the AMOLED edition, this will increase the font sizes just slightly. It's very similar to what they introduced on the Venue series back a couple years ago. But if your eyes aren't necessarily the most awesome, this will go ahead and help increase that font size just a little bit to make it a little bit easier to read. Okay, so what I want to do now is to walk through the basics of the user interface just really quickly to show you the difference between the AMOLED and the Solar side by side and some of the basics. Okay, here are the two watches side by side. This is on the watch face. You can customize the watch face as you see fit, adding different things to it, changing the display, the layout, etc. Down into the widget glances where you're going to find all of your data bits. In the case of Solar, you'll also see your Solar bits there. You can open up any of these given widget glances. For example, the weather one if I wanted to see more details about the weather. If I go down from there, again, very similar between the two of them, but slight differences in the user interface. You've got those little mini display window up there. They put some things there, some things not. Again, going down, relatively similar, just you have the color on the AMOLED. Backing out, we got some of the daily metrics, for example, in the health widget inside of that. You can see body battery, you've got sleep score. I've had no problems with sleep tracking. All the times I went to sleep and woke up are all correct, spot on. I don't really worry about sleep stages or sleep phases because the technology you'd use to go ahead and compare that against or grade that isn't all that accurate to begin with, even at like a pro level, so it's not something I dive into too much. But nonetheless, you've got your heart rate tracking in here, you've got HRV status, your steps are in there, and so on. Backing out again, you've got the rest of the widgets that you can customize as you see fit. Be it calendar widgets, moon phases, tidal phases, training readiness, training status, etc. And of course, all this information will sync into the Garmin Connect app, so you can look at it in much more detail, both short-term as well as long-term there. And then over the next few days, I'm going to drop my complete beginner's guide like I usually do. It's about 45 to 60 minutes long. I go through all these features a lot more slowly paced, so you can kind of understand how to use them feature by feature, both the tips and the things to be aware of. Check it out in the corner there when it drops, or hit subscribe, that way you don't miss it when it goes live. Okay, so with the basics out of the way, then we get into the sports side of things. There is like 100+ different sport modes on the Garmin Instinct 3 series, covering pretty much everything that you want. Garmin generally bucketizes sport modes into two core categories. Sport modes that have data behind them. So for example, in the case of running, you've got running dynamics data, running efficiency metrics, etc. Case of stand-up paddleboarding, you've got stroke rate, for example. And then there's some sports that are just there for categorization purposes. So the ability to basically say, hey, this is a trail run versus a regular run, therefore I want to categorize them differently. But from a technical standpoint, they're capturing the same data behind the scenes. When it comes to sensors, these watches connect to almost every ANT+ and Bluetooth smart sensor out in the market. The only exception is the Instinct 3 will not connect to something like Shimano Di2 or SRAM electronic wireless drivetrains. I put the sensor listing down below right there as well. To start a sport mode, you just simply tap the upper right-hand button. That opens a sport menu. You can customize the menu with the sports that you like, pin them to the top. You can go down to that menu and find the rest of the sport modes there. Once you tap open the sport mode that you want, you can then choose any settings you want to configure. For example, you could add a structured workout to it. That could come from something like Training Peaks or come from Garmin's own training plans, or you could use their daily suggested workout feature that'll automatically try to basically increase your fitness level each day. Or if you put a race on the calendar, a running race or a cycling race, it's surprisingly good and will definitely get you ready for that race. Or you can just again use their pre-camp training plans for marathons and whatever else that you can pull down from Garmin Connect. You can customize your data pages on either Garmin Connect Mobile, the smartphone app, or on the watch itself. They allow up to 6 data fields per page and a gazillion different custom data pages that you can create or add to there, plus stock data pages. It also supports Garmin's Connect IQ as well, so you can download third-party apps onto the watch, both for widgets as well as data fields in the watch itself. Once you start your workout, you're going to go ahead and see your data pages as you've configured, like you see right here on one of my runs right there. There are slight differences between obviously the AMOLED edition and the Solar edition, but I've had no problem seeing that display in any lighting conditions. Again, I had no problems on my 60K trek, for example. It ended in the darkness, last, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours I was in the dark. And again, no problems there, either viewing those watches or the data coming from those watches. At the end of the workout, you're going to go ahead and see all your stats on the watch face itself. And then you can also see those same stats in Garmin Connect Mobile on the Garmin website. It'll sync to third-party sites like Strava, Training Peaks, etc. automatically. All of that works pretty much the exact same way it did in the past. So then let's talk about navigation. On the Garmin Instinct 3, there is no maps, and I'm going to dive into that in a second, but you can go ahead and load routes on there, and you have what's called breadcrumb style navigation. So for my 60-kilometer trek, I went ahead and created a route first in Strava, which then synced to Garmin Connect. In Garmin Connect, I actually added waypoints there, and that's useful because later on you can see those waypoints on the watch in the up ahead listing, which lets you kind of know how far to each one of the things that you defined. I typically add waypoints for food and overlooks or just random things I want to know about, where they are, my kind of markers, if you will, throughout that particular route. Once you have your route, it'll automatically push to the watch. There are no limits on routes in terms of route points. There used to be in the past on the Instinct. That was removed about 16 months or so ago. So as long as you push the route from Garmin Connect, it'll create a fit file, pushes it through. I've had no problems loading up this route or even a 200-kilometer long route for the Tour de Mont Blanc, which has a gazillion points in it, and no issues in either Solar or AMOLED edition. From there, as you get started on that adventure, you will get churn-by-churn notifications when you come up to a churn. Now, the definition of a churn can kind of vary. Sometimes you get them on switchbacks, sometimes you don't, but generally speaking, Garmin's pretty good about defining what is considered a churn, and I had no real problems with that. You'll also see the progress on the total elevation profile as well shown, but there is no Climb Pro on these watches. It's definitely a big bummer. This is what Climb Pro is right there. Basically shows you automatically how long to the top of that current climb that you have, and all your climbs are automatically categorized and divided up. It is super useful if you're doing climbs. Something Garmin has on their Phoenix series, on their Forerunner watches, but for some reason didn't make it on this watch, which is too bad. And that's likely because of the lack of maps. This watch, despite being $500, doesn't have maps, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Every single one of Garmin's competitors right now have maps on their watches at far lower price points. AmazFit in the 200s, Apple in the 200s, Google in the 200s, 300s, Polar and Suunto and COROS in the 300s. Again, this makes absolutely no sense at this point in time for Garmin to not have maps. Even Garmin's own Fenix 7 is on sale right now for $409, and it has maps, of course. The Epix, which is the AMOLED edition of the Fenix series, has maps. It's also on sale for $400 as well. Garmin's Forerunner 955, the MIP-based display, is priced at $399 right now, and it has maps. And I get that Garmin is trying to have differentiation to the Fenix, but there's a lot of other ways they can do that, as they illustrate themselves with the Fenix versus the Mark being $3,000, the Fenix being $1,000, and the Mark actually having less features than the... Let's set that aside for the moment. Point is that this feels a lot like 5 to 7 years ago when Garmin tried to charge for maps, or was charging for maps, and all the rest of the competitors gave them for free. It just seems like the 2025 version of that, and I don't think that's really acceptable on a watch designed to go in the outdoors and do crazy adventures for literally forever, for unlimited power, and to not have that. But that's just my little rant on that. Anyways, it is what it is. Garmin did add a city dot on the Instinct, something new to the Instinct where you can see the cities, but only some big cities. I don't understand the value of this feature the way it's currently implemented today. Right now, only big things are showing up. So when I was in the mountains, the nearest city was Palma, like 30 kilometers away. That is not at all useful if something's going wrong from an emergency standpoint. There are gazillions of tiny little towns dotted in the mountains. If I could see those, then this feature could be useful. In any case, switching topics to something that is implemented super well, let's talk about Solar. So Solar on the Instinct 3 is only in the MIP-based display. And as I noted earlier on, they've changed the solar panel to get rid of that reddish hue. It's now black around the entire thing. But it's more than just getting out of the red into the black. It's also the fact that this new solar panel is much more powerful. Now, the way Solar works on a Garmin watch is that on the watch face, you'll see this little sun icon right there in the corner. That sun icon is broken up into a number of different pieces, and each one of those pieces indicates how much solar percentage you have currently coming into the watch. Like it's a bit of a solar gauge, if you will. But if you go down from that, you can see the total solar power over the last 6 hours, as well as what it's pulled in for the day. You'll see that listed in lux hours. And lux hours is, think of it like just a tank to know how much you're pouring into your battery. Now, I've done a ton of testing on this to see how much that tank actually gets filled up. First, let's talk about the workout data, and let's talk about just like standby hanging out in the sun data. So on the workout side, let's look at that 12-hour hike. This is the hike that was in the mountains, under the trees at times. It was a blue sky day, but I wasn't always facing the sun. So it wasn't actually a ton of solar gains in the grand scheme of things. Still, if I look at what my battery life looked like, navigation was enabled on all of my watches, optical heart rate sensor was enabled, and in the GPS only configuration. So you can see this chart here showing the battery life over the course of the hike and all the different units, and you can see it easily blows away the Garmin Instinct 2X on the same side, basically right next to the other one, so the exact same kind of solar intake, the same settings, etc. But then I went for a ride, and that's where things got absolutely crazy. So this 3-hour ride outside, a road cycling ride here, it was a triangle, and the way it worked out, the sun was only really on 1/3 of those triangle legs there. So not talking a ton of solar power. Yet at the end of it, 3 hours later, I was only down 1% battery life. So that estimates out at 300 hours of battery life. And in reality, I suspect it's even longer than that due to the way the battery life is only recorded in 1% increments. So I could have been at 99.5 as opposed to 99.1, and it would still show me the same thing. That is incredibly impressive, especially since the accuracy was spot on perfect compared to a whole slate of multi-band and dual frequency devices I had with me. Okay, so then let's look at just simply sitting it in the sun. Just putting it on my roof literally and letting it sit there for half a day to see what happens. I will note first off though, in the current production firmware, the solar gains doesn't work. In fact, neither does that little sun icon there. It just simply will always show nothing. How on earth this passed like quality checking? I mean, solar, you had one job to show solar gains and to have those gains translate into the battery. Neither of those work in the current production firmware. However, over the weekend, I got a beta firmware, so I stuck the watches on the roof that you see right there for varying times. The first day was about 3.5 hours before the clouds came in. In that case, I had gained 328 lux hours on one and 287 on the other. The next day, I put it out there again for about half a day before the clouds came in. And again, even more. Now we're up to over 500 lux hours for 5.5 hours. It's only 5.5 hours, and a chunk of that was with like overcast skies. You can see that on the little chart there as the lux kind of conditions drop off. So on a really sunny day, you know, at sunrise to sunset, easily could blow through 1,000 lux hours of these just sitting in the sun. Of course, the reality is that they're not just going to sit in the sun in most cases. Instead, it's going to be on your wrist, and your wrist is constantly moving around. It's out of the sun, in the sun, and so on. But just shows you the potential here and shows you how good Garmin solar technology is on the Instinct 3. Of course, now we're going to have to go from great to just not great at all. The bug section. We'll get to accuracy in a section. We'll get back to greatness. But bugs, this has not been a smooth ride, especially on the solar. And now I'm going to try to keep this section very succinct. However, my written review has all the bugs listed out in much more detail, what I've encountered, what's been fixed, etc. So here is the core of the bugs over there. And as of right now, as I'm filming this video, it's been pretty stable for the last week. On the current beta firmwares that I'm now on, as opposed to the production firmwares, that resolves virtually all of my bug issues, I think, for the most part. And I haven't had any crashes at all on any of the watches in the last 7 days. Setting aside Garmin's global crash day yesterday, which affected all their watches, not just the Instinct. So setting that aside, in terms of the Instinct stuff, up until this moment, the last week has been very, very stable versus the previous 2 weeks. It was like crashes every day on every activity, loss of data, all that kind of stuff. I think I'm past that. But again, none of those things that I saw should have happened on this watch at release. Like, there just wasn't a big enough test pool to catch these, or whatever the case is. Just shouldn't have seen those things. But the good news is I think we're past that. Hope we're past that. And it's pretty stable at this point. Now, let's spend like 2 minutes talking about accuracy. I've got an entire, again, written section on this, my written review, if you want to dive into every one of my data sets. But let's just start off, get right into it. First off, from an optical heart rate sensor standpoint, the Instinct 3 unfortunately has Garmin's Gen 4 optical heart rate sensor. Despite the Gen 5 coming out almost 2 years ago, Garmin didn't include it in this watch, even though they have it in the Venue for cheaper, but whatever. In most cases, it's pretty accurate. You can see here this indoor trainer ride, pretty much spot on across the board. You can see here another indoor trainer ride with some intervals, also pretty much spot on across the board. You can see this outside the interval run, perfect. Zero problems there, despite, you know, high intensity intervals for hour and 15 minutes, no problems. You can see this trail run, really good job there, no problems. However, where you start to see the difference is the edge cases. Here is an evening run I did on a much cooler evening, and so in this case, the temperatures had dropped quite a bit, And here you can see it really struggled compared to the Garmin Fenix 8, which has the new Gen 5 optical heart rate sensor on the other wrist, and that had zero problems. In fact, you see the same sort of thing on another cooler evening night. Again, Instinct 3 versus Fenix 8 on two different wrists. Here on this outside ride where it struggled. Yeah, on this daytime ride for 3 hours last week, no problems. I mean, for the most part, it's pretty darn good. There are a few minor wobbles here and there, but very, very good overall. So then switching over to the GPS side of things, and we got this Sat IQ enabled as a default. So that'll use multiband when it needs it and then skip it when it doesn't. So road ride right here, no problems in this. You can zoom into some of these switchbacks. It even outperforms the Wahoo Ace bike computer with its fancy dual frequency GPS, a giant antenna around. Here is this trail run I did right there, up against cliff edges and stuff like that, and no issues at all in here. You can see it easily outperforming the Garmin Instinct 2 against these rock cliffs that you see right there. So kind of right up against that into this little cave there, and it hits that pretty darn well. In the woods, no problems. Out road running, no problems. Everything was good. So then I wanted to try GPS only. So that is reducing the GPS down to one of the lowest options you have from an accuracy standpoint to see how well it does, because it drastically improves the battery life. And here you can see, starting off with kind of the basics out on the road, things are looking pretty good. A minor corner cutting by about like 2 meters at one point on one corner, but not the rest of the corners. But again, for the battery gains, like, you would probably never notice that if you weren't wearing like 4 GPS watches at once as I was. And on that 60K hike, if I look at the vast majority of that hike, we're talking like 99.5% of it, it is identical. There was only a handful of scenarios where it was slightly different. You can see that right here on this switchback section, where that purple line, it's like, YOLO, I'm not doing a switchback, I'm just going straight through it. On the whole, they're virtually identical across a lot of scenarios there. And then rounding out GPS accuracy, I got open water swim. You can see that right there. Solar on one, AMOLED on the other. Pretty much the same as the reference GPS track, which is on a swim buoy kind of behind me here. No problems. My wife's GPS tracks for open water swim are also the same as her Fenix 8 too. Very strong there. And then from an elevation accuracy standpoint, here's the elevation plot for that particular hike up into the mountains. And all the units were within a couple meters almost the entire time. So really good job there on the altimeter. Okay, so where are we overall? Well, setting aside the bugs that I saw, and assuming that the firmware version I'm on right now gets rolled out to you, then I think they're in a pretty good spot in terms of the watch and stability and all that kind of stuff. Garmin has done a good job on delivering a very solid little watch, whether it be on the solar side or on the AMOLED side, depending on, again, what you want out of a watch. If you want that crazy long battery life, this thing blows away virtually everything in the market. It is mind-boggling what it does, especially that GPS-only configuration, where the accuracy, as I just showed, is really, really good. Yet if you want the AMOLED display, for the brilliance of that display, you've got that there as well. Where things fall apart in the Instinct lineup is, of course, the mapping, especially if you're on the sportier side of things. But if you don't care about that and you just want a durable-looking Instinct watch, this does that, and it does it pretty darn well. Hopefully you found this video interesting and useful. If so, go ahead and whack that like button at the bottom there, or subscribe for plenty more Spurs technology goodness. With that, have a good one.